When the world rots, we set it afire for the sake of the next world.
And all who believe shall be saved.
They let me pick. Did I ever tell you that?
Now you've gone and rescued the wench. How very quaint. Pitying creatures that are beyond help.
But so much of me is wrong. Out of place. You might be too late.
Kill me, and take these eyes away. Before I am drawn into the darkness, seduced by the thin light, and the awful betrayal.
You ignorant slaves. Finally taken notice, have you?
The fire-linking curse, the legacy of lords. Let it all fade into nothing.
Child of my enemy, why have you come? I offer no forgiveness. A father's sins pass to his son.
I've seen your kind. Time and time again. Every fleeing man must be caught. Every secret must be unearthed. Such is the conceit of the self-proclaimed seeker of truth. But in the end, you lack the stomach for the agony that you'll bring upon yourself.
Surrender your fires to the true heir. Let him grant death.
You were weak, and gods must be strong.
I am a timeless chorus, a sweet unity of purpose. Join your voice with mine, and sing victory everlasting.
This spot marks our grave, but you may rest here too, if you like.
Only you can halt what he has set in motion. This is our fight, and I will see it finished.
Rise if you would, for that is our curse.
But let us never forget those who journeyed into the howling dark and did not return.
She will understand. We are both firekeepers after all. May the flames guide thy way.
Make the tales true, and burn this world away.
This is the way the world ends.
Wake me when you need me.
Trilogies and media are commonly produced to the original title's detriment, especially in gaming. Very few series are deserving of 3 titles that all tie into one another mechanically and narratively. Dark Souls and the original Bungie Halo trilogy, in my view, are nearly flawless series that successfully introduce, maintain, and conclude the series of games. Oftentimes, the third title has to maintain the high expectation of a fan base, challenge their assumptions of the series, and end the series in a satisfying way. The third entry often falls under the most pressure and scrutiny on release from fans. Halo 3 and Dark Souls 3 share many of the same successes and failures in their respective series, in my view. While this is not to say that these titles are in a shared universe, or one is better than the other, both games had a similar impact on me as the player and a fan of the series they function as the third entry to. Despite one being an action RPG and the other a first-person shooter, these series share many similar threads in their third releases. Halo 3 claims to finish the fight, and Dark Souls 3 teased that only embers would remain. These games promise an end to bring the ring and the stars and the fire that would never die to their close. When it comes to third entries, there is often an expectation to refine the core gameplay loop. There is pressure to tighten up the experience and lessons learned from the previous 2 entries, and take what worked from the other titles. Dark Souls 3 and Halo 3 successfully do this in my view, where they are able to keep enough of what makes the gameplay loop enjoyable and memorable within a well-crafted package. Halo 3 offers many new weapons to the sandbox, like the brute armaments and additions to the human arsenal. These guns offer some new ways to approach campaign and multiplayer encounters while refining mainstays like the assault rifle, battle rifle, and carbine. However, some weapons did suffer in utility such as the Magnum, shotgun, and plasma rifle from the previous two titles. While the iterations of many weapons have changed here, this was the largest sandbox to date with the most refined or multiplayer-friendly versions of these weapons. There is an overall balance to the sandbox while offering more tools to play with. Vehicles also get the same treatment where the brute vehicles like the Chopper add some variety, and the Human Hornet allows for some new territory and level design encounters with aerial battles. The same can be said for the Covenant and Flood AI. These enemies sport new factions and forms, adding to their diversity of behavior on the battlefield. For example, the Grunts will now enter a final move where they will light 2 plasma grenades and charge the player. Jackals are more mobile and reactive than their Halo 1 and 2 counterparts. The same can be said for the Flood, where they act more zombie-like and unpredictable, instead of just rushing to the player like in previous titles. Halo 3, like Halo 2, offers a wide variety of locations on Earth and the Forerunner installations. We also get to see what happens during a complete takeover of the Flood in the level Cortana. These environments are varied, offering greater expression in color palettes and atmosphere. These levels capture the human industry, the Forerunner dominance, and the horror of the Flood incredibly well that later games would neglect, undersell, or generify. Halo 2 is notorious for being extremely difficult on Legendary, whereas it feels more fair on Halo 3, harkening back to Combat Evolved. While many may consider this title to be the easiest in the series, it is the most fun to play casually because of these balance changes. Legendary is in that nice sweet spot of challenge, but not to the point of feeling like Chief is made out of paper like in Halo 2. Much like Halo 3, Dark Souls 3 offers many refinements to the core gameplay loop and experience. One of the main refinements is the boss fights. Boss encounters in DS3 are extremely fair, balanced, and mostly free of hitbox jankiness. I have always seen DS3 as the tightest in terms of boss mechanics, not only in the Souls series, but the other FromSoft titles as well. There's never a time where I found myself getting frustrated with the hitboxes in DS3 like I might in DS1 and 2 or even later titles. Even grab attacks in this game feel fair when caught or dodged for the most part. Bosses like Gale, Dragonslayer Armor, Gundyr, and the Twin Princess come to mind as some of the most mechanically well-designed bosses in the Dark Souls series and the spin-off games. There isn't a bad boss in this game in my view. While there might be some that are annoying or underwhelming, I wouldn't define any of them as bad, whereas some bosses from DS1 and 2 are objectively horrible designs. The same can be said for combat. Both rolling and opting for a shield feel great when it comes to iframes and player maneuverability. Most builds have a good time on a non-challenge playthrough in this title versus previous entries in my view. The refinement also took place in the leveling system when compared to DS2. The ADP stat is removed from DS2, which even as a DS2 defender, I acknowledge is a good change. However, the system could have been further tuned if equip load was tied to endurance like in DS1, and instead of adding vitality to the stat list again. The difficulty is the most balanced in the series in my view as well. Much like with Halo 3's Legendary, I find that Dark Souls 2's difficulty sits in a nice sweet spot where there is challenge and mostly fair encounters. As a professional R1 spammer, I find that Dark Souls 3 to be the most balanced. But in all seriousness, Dark Souls 3 mostly fulfills the hard but fair gameplay that fans want from the series. Much like with the boss design, the overall package is refined and focuses on what works for the series to make for a finely tuned product. Both games excel at what makes their series great from a gameplay perspective. They offer the most variety of tools the player can use, refinement of enemy encounters, and overall player accomplishment through their difficulty. Both meet the expectations that come with the third titles in a trilogy. They take the lessons from the previous 2 entries to offer a meticulously crafted and sculpted approach to gameplay. Interestingly, both games share the criticisms of being a slow start to get the narrative ball rolling. I would agree with this sentiment, as much of the first few levels of both games, while fun to traverse through, don't raise the stakes quick enough despite being marketed as the grand conclusion to their respective series. DS3 to me truly begins at Irithyll, the first distinct location in the game when compared to others in the series. While I enjoy some of the early levels like Undead Settlement and Cathedral of the Deep, They lack distinction from the aesthetics of previous titles. Irithyll is the first level that feels new to me when looking at previous levels from other titles. Irithyll's unique presentation conveys its importance and is paid off when players discover it's built from the remains of Anor Londo. This location feels important and unique, and the first view of it is absolutely breathtaking. It just takes a bit too long to get to that point. The same can be said for Halo 3, where the first few levels are often viewed as filler from a narrative standpoint. While these first few levels are fun to me, there is little that we accomplish or do in these early stages. As Chief, we rendezvous with the UNSC, escape the secret base, clear a highway, and neutralize a couple of AA guns. That's it. Arguably, the game could have started on the Storm or Floodgate, and it would have been just fine. These early levels are fun, as I always enjoy the human-based levels of Halo. They just don't establish a sense of importance or grandiosity that comes with the idea of finishing the fight. While both games are a slow start, once the stakes pick up or some awesome encounters begin, that hype is mostly maintained to both games' final stages. Both titles also have a reverence for the first game in the series. The biggest criticism I have from Dark Souls 3 is its insistence on replaying the same themes from DS1. While DS2 attempted to set itself apart from DS1, Dark Souls 3 treads the same story beats, acting as more of a sequel to 1 than to 2. Essentially, we continue Gwyn's legacy, whereas in 2 it was completely forgotten by the inhabitants of Drang Lake. In Lothric, everything about the First Flame and the systems in place are remembered. We even see countless references along our journey, like Anor Londo, seeing the old Firelink Shrine, repeat characters, and tons of visual and item references. While I enjoy some of these references, these do occur to the point where it's difficult for DS3 to step out of the shadow of DS1. In many ways, it lacks soul, pun intended. The themes are essentially a raising of the stakes from Dark Souls 1. The need to light the First Flame is even more dire, with the need to return to the Lords to their thrones. Everything about Dark Souls 3 is more. More Lords, more kindling, more ash, more references, more nostalgia. It does the gameplay component so well, but drops the ball when it comes to the story and setting itself apart from its predecessors to stand on its own. It relies too much on what came before instead of taking the series to new avenues. The same could be said for Halo 3. Much of the focus is on stopping the Flood and the lighting of the rings once again. This time it's more rings and more stakes with the fight on the Ark. While it's a cool setting and does hype up the odds and obstacles, Halo 3 in many ways is a retread of Halo CE. We don't get to see more of Earth and the Covenant inner workings like in Halo 2. These were the focal point of Halo 2 and are now more of a backdrop. The Ark does offer some newness to the story, but I find that there could have been room to expand more on these faction stories. The Arbiter could have been expanded on. Truth and his followers could have had more of a spotlight, and the human and elite strategic infighting could have been played out a bit more. This is where we get to see two species that drove one another to the brink join up. It's a shame we didn't get to see more of the tension play out between the leaders of both armies to set aside their differences. Halo 3 simplifies the story to Halo CE's levels instead of continuing and adding more to the complexities established in Halo 2 that came with playing as the Arbiter and showcasing the Covenant hierarchy. While both stories have their highlights in Halo 3's conflict on the Ark and Dark Souls 3's returning the Lords of Cinder to their thrones, the stories opt to simply just do more of the past versus expanding more on some of the experimental sides of the series or adding entirely new themes and ideas. There is a reverence for the first title in the series to establish nostalgia and familiarity, but not enough of the experimentation that made the second titles special in their own way from a narrative perspective. Both titles play their stories safe when compared to the previous two entries. Halo 3 lacks the depth established in discussing the Covenant side of the conflict, or even the Elite side of the conflict. There could have been scenes showcasing the Elites uniting with humans to start off the campaign, for example. The Covenant's nuance is stripped away for a simple bad guys approach, and the Elites lack the spotlight that was granted to them in Halo 2. All characters take a back seat in favor of the focus on Chief finding Cortana and stopping the rings from firing. Dark Souls 3, while being a different cycle, plays more heavily into the culture of Lordran. Lothric is essentially the new Lordran of the series, where it takes a bit too much from the themes and cultures to set itself apart. As stated earlier, both Halo 3 and Dark Souls 3 opt to repeat more of the first game in their series instead of trying new things. Both games stick to what works and is safe for a wider audience, whether or not that was intentional from the development teams. This also plays into how the games take less risks overall. Halo 3 is reluctant to take the focus off Chief at any point in the game, minimizing many of the characters and their interactions. Dark Souls 3's reliance on the First Flame again removes the opportunity for different themes to take center stage, like the Curse from Dark Souls 2. Dark Souls 3 doesn't offer too many themes and instead builds from some of the missing pieces from Dark Souls 1. There is less newness in the story from both games. They take what worked or what resonated from most players from the first two games to craft a story that is still very good, but lacks a bit of innovation. Many of the characters take a hit from the previous titles as well. In Halo 3, the Arbiter is often referenced as being no more than a sidekick when compared to his outstanding portrayal in Halo 2. In Halo 3, he has little screen time, which also leads to less screen time for the elites as well. The Arbiter functioned as a gateway into their side of the war, and without him, those factions suffer as a result. Miranda also suffers from the sidelining of characters. She was a headstrong and intelligent commander, and in Halo 3, she makes some very poor decisions and has some pretty cringy lines. Johnson suffers similarly, where he becomes less of a badass he was in 1 and 2, and instead becomes the damsel in distress throughout the campaign. Quite a few of the mission objectives are either saving Johnson or finishing his objectives. He is presented as less capable overall, where before he was willing to pilot a Scarab and go toe-to-toe with Tartarus. In Dark Souls 3, many characters are brought back or referenced to their detriment rather than a positive addition to their established character. Siegward is a watered-down version of Siegmeyer from Dark Souls 1. He is just a jolly idiot, whereas his character in Dark Souls 1 was more nuanced, where he'd get frustrated feeling like he is being outshined by the chosen undead, making his story there all the more tragic. Andre is just Andre, copy-pasted. I've never minded the use of repeat characters so long as it bolsters them, but in DS3, there seems to be a lack of newness or innovation with its characters. A character like Gale is completely useless to the story in my view, despite being a fantastic boss fight. The refinement to the gameplay in Dark Souls 3 could have been transferred to the characters as well with a less is more approach. Few characters stand out like Yuria, Frida, Morn, Henri, and Ludleth as memorable figures that expand the lore or tell an impactful story. Having a smaller cast overall could have brought out new or better character iterations. Even Gwyn himself is reduced to a mustache-twirling villain through the DLC. The DLC delves into just how horrible of a person Gwyn was for the sake of being evil, instead of being motivated by his fear of losing his reign and age, in my view. He loses some of the sympathy that I had for him in Dark Souls 1, and instead is just simply a bad guy in DS3. While both games place the main character in the driver's seat of the narrative effectively, the surrounding characters suffer, which is a shame since both main characters are either silent or hardly speak. Their story is told and conveyed through the side characters, and when those characters are stripped back or underdeveloped, the story lacks by effect. Even though both titles present a refinement in their core gameplay loop, they present very little new ideas, with Halo 3 having a bit more of a leg up on this. Halo 3's equipment is a cool addition, but most of these tools are useless in either campaign or multiplayer. Their use is rather awkward as well, and that can be shown in how enemy AI randomly lob equipment at the player. Halo 3 was able to make up for the lack of story innovation with its multiplayer options. Modes like Forge and Theater were revolutionary to the player experience, along with the matchmaking options available during the 360 era. Dark Souls 3's lack of innovation in the story is made up for with little improvements such as quality of life with menu UI and covenants, and the addition of weapon arts that would later go on to spark the Ash of War system in Elden Ring. Overall, both games lack new ideas and instead make little changes to improve the player experience in single player, and Halo 3 would revolutionize the multiplayer and creative modes that would be expanded on in future titles. They both clean up a lot of the jank from previous titles, which is extremely commendable. Sometimes it is better to fix the mistakes than try new things. As someone who wants to have his cake and eat it too, I would have liked to have seen both fresh ideas with the refined ones, but I will commend both games for being able to produce the smoothest experience overall at the time of their release when compared to their previous entries. Dark Souls 3 and Halo 3, being the conclusion to their series, offer the most cinematic approach to their storytelling. Halo 3 takes place on the Ark, where all Halo rings can be fired at once, and the need to stop Truth from reaching his goal of lighting them all for the Great Journey. The Flood with Gravemind are the most menacing and threatening not only in their gameplay function, but presence as well, as we see them overtake the city in Floodgate and the results of their infestation in Cortana. Dark Souls 3 presents the stakes with the world's craving to enter the next cycle of fire very well. Characters like the Firekeeper and the inhabitants of the Painted World are begging for the next cycle. They want the suffering to end so that it can all begin anew. The world reflects this desperation, where it shows the decay of society and the very fabric of time itself throughout the base game and DLC. Lothric and the world at large wants to die and wants the suffering to end. The use of multiple endings also places more agency on the player and their choices as well. When looking at both games, they raise the stakes successfully, even if it is just more of the same from previous titles. They take what worked previously and up the ante enough to cause players to care and want to see the end through. Both titles are also the shortest in their series in terms of length, or at least they feel that way to me. Halo 3 has the least amount of levels, not counting the opening scene, at 9 total. Many of these levels are rather short aside from the Ark and the Covenant, which are considered to be the best levels in the series. Surrounding these two grand scale levels, the remaining levels consist of short skirmishes or trudges through hostile zones with little variety in terms of encounters, whether those be on foot or by vehicle. However, there's a variety in terms of location and artistic design, where all the levels collectively offer plenty of variety as discussed earlier. When looking at the base game of DS3, it is the shortest in the series on an average playthrough. The exploration was much more streamlined and the zones themselves are much smaller than previous titles. This again plays into the quality over quantity as discussed in the boss selection. DS3 put all of its eggs into the boss basket, and it happens to work pretty well for those who care more about fighting bosses than exploring the levels of a Souls game. Sometimes short and sweet is the best way to cap off a trilogy. Despite seemingly being the end for both series, both offer open endings to suggest or tease at a sequel. Chief being trapped in space became the catalyst for the 343 Halo games that would continue his story. Dark Souls 3 has not yet received a follow-up title bearing the series name, but the thematic ties between cycles that link all of the games does open up the potential for a sequel at some point in the future. However, I do think these series should stay and should have stayed in their trilogy of games. The 343 games have not been great in my view after giving them a try many times, and Dark Souls 3 was a fine enough conclusion to the series. Essentially, both of these games cap off the trilogy when looking at them in a vacuum. Let them rest so that they can be remembered for what they were, and not what they have or may become. Interestingly, I find that both titles are in need of a remake or remaster at some point in the near future. As someone who would like to see these franchises rest in terms of sequels, I wouldn't mind a remaster or remake for either one of these games. Halo 3 has fallen well beyond the typical anniversary remake/remaster release schedule, so it may not be likely at this stage. I do find that Halo 3 is still visually captivating thanks to its art style, but the human faces and minimalist backgrounds do show some of its age these days. Dark Souls 3 has some great art style as well, but I find that the lighting is very poor, where it will often wash out character and environmental details. More love to these games through proper remakes and remasters would be welcome in my view. When looking at both of these games and my experience with them, these were the first two game series that really captivated me. Halo was the first mature game that I played, and it got me into Xbox and console gaming initially. Even though I would go on to play many FPS games in my youth, Halo always felt the most right to me. I had always preferred the more arcade-style combat versus the Twitch crackhead approach to FPS games like COD. Multiplayer during the 360 era was a time I will remember forever as well. There's not been anything quite like this period in gaming since. My love for Dark Souls came later in my life and was the first series since Halo that I could never get enough of. Despite my many criticisms of both games, these two are the most that I have played out of their respective trilogies. These two games, despite their issues, are so much fun to play and never feel like a chore like the other two in their series feel like from time to time. The developers nailed the core gameplay of both games to make a refined experience. If the story had to suffer in some ways to make that happen, then I understand. They both conclude the series in a way that pays respects to previous titles even if it's a bit too on the nose at times. They managed to make the gameplay even more finely crafted even if it means a lack of innovation. They successfully finish the fight and end the cycle somewhere at the end of the world or somewhere among the stars. The infinite loop of the fire and the rings end here, full circle. Thanks for watching. If you have any experiences, common threads, disagreements, etc., feel free to let me know in the comments below. I use just a handful of examples in each of my categories, so I am sure that there are more through lines that could be shared and discussed further. I'd love to hear your thoughts as these games were and still are as impactful to me as they were when I first played them. Thank you for watching, and I hope you reach your great journey and find your first flame. Take care.
Things look different, without the prophet's lies clouding my vision. I would like to see our own world, to know that it is safe. Fear not, for we have made it so.
This is my canvas. It's to be a cold, dark, and very gentle place. One day, it will make someone a goodly home.
Were it so easy.